everyone. This is our third webinar now in the 4-part series for team discovery, which is really exciting. Hopefully, considering that I've got a few of the same people back again, it means that you're finding it interesting and that you're wanting to learn more, which is great. So we'll kick off today. So I thought it might just be good to start off with a really brief overview of what we've gone through so far, again, just to keep applying our learnings and to keep reiterating what we've been talking about. So obviously when we're looking at team discovery, we've got the team discovery wheel with 4 key quadrant areas. By now I'm sure you're all quite familiar with the names. So when we're looking at that innovation and agility quadrant, for anyone who might be new joining, we're looking at people who will typically sit here that are quite big picture thinking, so really bold with their ideas, quite innovative in the approach that they take in terms of what can be done next. So really having that approach of what's new, what's the next step, and quick decision makers. So really comfortable around risk and will make decisions quite fast, and probably also comfortable working independently, maybe even making those decisions independently when needed. Then we look bottom right, we've got that results and discipline quadrant. So again, you're going to have fast-paced people who typically will sit within this quadrant, but they'll bring in a little bit more of that detail-orientated approach. So they'll probably double check a little bit the facts, information, make sure everything's right. And I would call them real game plan builders. So they're going to have a bit of that approach of thinking about what needs to be done as well as what's existing and really building out a plan for success. If we look at that bottom left-hand quadrant, we've got that process and precision. So here, typically you'll find your really stable players, employees who are quite well organized, have that sort of preference for structure and for routine, and will always do really quality work. So have that quality focus, meaning making sure that everything's being done accurately. And then finally, we've got the top left, that teamwork and employee experience quadrant or customer experience quadrant. Here you'll find your team players who are very collaborative, open and honest in the way that they communicate, and quite people-oriented when we see people within that quadrant. So hopefully everyone's had the chance to start looking in the tool, maybe to see where they themselves sit in which quadrant, or where their team members sit. Please feel free, if anyone knows what quadrant they sit in, just based off maybe some conversations that we've had in the past webinars with your reference profiles, or if you've actually plotted yourself, more than welcome to just add it in the chat. I'd just be really curious to see if we've got the same type of people in similar quadrants or different quadrants. So if you know, feel free to, just add that in the chat there. But what we're obviously looking at with team discovery is, yes, where does an individual sit? But more importantly, where does the team sit? We're really looking at that team formation. That's what's most important rather than just that individual level. We're trying to see, do we have a team who sits all in one quadrant? Do we have a team that actually sits across 3 or 4 quadrants? What's our team formation? And then obviously last week, we did a big focus on team types. So once we actually plot people within the quadrant, we can actually see what type of team are there. And we learned that there's 9 different team types. One of them, for example, is the cultivating team type. And that just helps us understand a little bit more the strength areas to do with the team that we're working with. Where are they naturally in terms of their behavioral tendencies? Where are they going to lean more towards? So really interesting insight when we get into that team type. Great, I've got some people who have added in. We've got some teamwork, employee experience, innovation and agility, process and precision. So we've got a good mix here today, so we can draw on all of that. So how do we bring it all together? What's next? We've plotted the team, we found out their team type. What's the next step? So really where we're going from here is actually starting to align the team's objectives. So what are their objectives in order to achieve the strategy that they're trying to accomplish? So that's really the next big part in the team discovery process. So we want to combine this with the team types. So we want to use all that knowledge in terms of the strength areas that the team has, start to link it with the strategy to help answer questions like, how can we leverage the team's natural strengths? How can we leverage that when we're trying to achieve our strategy? where are the gap areas? So where might there be some areas where the team actually needs to flex in order to achieve their objectives and to achieve this strategy? And starting to have a bit more of that awareness, because sometimes we don't quite realize where the objectives might sit and how they could, yes, be in an area where the team feels quite comfortable with, but they might actually be in an opposing area where it might need to be a bit of a flex or a bit of a stretch for them to actually achieve it. And then finally, also looking at what does each team member bring to the table? You might have a diverse team who, like I said, might split across multiple quadrants. What strengths is each individual bringing? What are their gap areas? Do you have other team members that are filling in people's gaps? Other team members that are sort of working alongside to do with the strengths? Really trying to understand the formation of your team. So today we'll be digging into the objectives piece of the tool and how we link those objectives to your strategy, and then use that to give not only you as the manager or the leader awareness, but as well as your team members in terms of how can they go about ensuring that they can achieve the objectives set out. So I'm not sure if anyone has had a play around with this part of the tool or has sort of gone through and chosen objectives for their existing team or for any teams that they've put through. But I've sort of done a little bit of a mock-up of what it would look like. And one thing I do want to note that's really great about the tool is that you can choose the type of team that you have put through. So if you've put through a standard team, you can select standard team as the option. Or if you're actually putting through an executive team or a leadership team, you can also choose that as an option. You will get different objectives based on what type of team you're looking at. So that's something that's really important to make sure that you select the right team to get the relevant objectives. So when you select the objectives in the tool, you will get about 20 to choose from. There are 5 objectives to do with each quadrant. So as you can imagine, each objective links to one of the quadrants. I've got some examples up here that you can start to have a little bit of a read through. But what you'll see is with each objective, the language that's being used really suits the quadrant that it sits in. So if we look at that teamwork and employee experience quadrant, you've got an objective like guide others to improve collaboration or provide help that allows others to resolve issues or complete work. We can see here that there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of guidance, a lot of support. And typically those objectives, you'll find people who sit within that teamwork and employee experience quadrant will feel quite natural doing. Similar, if we look at the results in discipline, some of the objectives there, you've got develop strategies to increase market presence. So again, we know that people who sit in the results and discipline quadrant are quite results orientated. They want to make sure that what they're doing is going to be leading in terms of, against any competitors, but they're also going to have a really great outlook in terms of processing and putting in plan any sort of set structure. So, you've got the other objective there, like plan projects that can be measured, tracked and shared. So you can start to see how the language in each objective does suit a certain quadrant. Now, as I said, there's 20 that you can select from. We normally recommend that you select about 4 or 5 key objectives that go with your strategy. So obviously don't select all 20 because you'll have each one pop up and that might be a little bit hard to manage, or even 10. Really hone it down to 4 or 5 key objectives that your team needs to focus on in order to achieve your current strategy. So this is a good example, like I've got up here, of the standard team objectives, but also I just wanted to bring up the difference between the leadership team's objectives. So you'll see now that the language has changed, the objectives have changed to be more suited towards any type of executive or leadership teams. Like I said, really important that you distinguish which type of team you have so you can get the right objectives. You'll start to see, if we look at that innovation and agility quadrant, we've got create, redefine a company's brand or perception in the market, determine how to best commercialize ideas or any inventions. So you can see how this language is starting to change and be a little bit more leadership team focused. If we look again at that process and precision quadrant, improve forecast accuracy to ensure long-term planning and improve long-term planning. So again, the words have slightly changed to suit the team, but they still will match quite well to the quadrant area. So again, the objectives will still suit each quadrant. So just a really good example here of the differences between the standard team's objectives and the leadership team's objectives. Now, once you go through and you actually select 4 or 5 key objectives, when you click next on the system, you will actually be given, similar to team types, you actually be given something called a strategy type. And you'll see here that the strategy types, the words are really similar to the team types. And I just thought, again, I'll just pop up a graph in terms of the formation of where these strategy types sit to do with the quadrants. The one key difference is that there are actually 10 strategy types. So you'll see that there's an extra one there in the middle, the balancing strategy type. That one's new. That's not within the team types, but the rest you'll see is quite similar. But how we know that, or how we can distinguish the difference between a team type and a strategy type is that a strategy type will have that purple pink sort of ring around it. A team type will have that blue ring. So like I mentioned, once you select your objectives, it will give you a strategy type telling you what you're actually focusing on. Now, it's really common that your strategy type will be different to your team type. And that's because more often than not all 5 objectives will sit in the quadrant area where your team maybe is most situated. You'll find that there might be some objectives that sit within that area, and there might be other objectives that actually sit quite differently. So that's why you'll more often than not get a different strategy type, purely based on the fact that the objectives that you've chosen will have some differences to the team's natural strengths. It is very common, and I know sometimes it can be a real aha moment if anyone's put through a team and then done the objectives and they actually see where they sit in comparison to their team. A lot of times it's a bit of an eye opener because you're like, wow, yeah, I didn't realize that the objectives are a little bit different to my team's formation. Or you're like, that sort of makes sense. I can see where there's been some struggles within the team. So it's a fantastic piece to look at. Now, I thought to make it really practical and to really understand how to best use this objectives feature within Team Discovery, we could actually go through a couple case studies. And again, this is where I'll be getting a little bit of your input to help guide through the questions. But just to start off with this first case study here, as you can see, we've got a team of 7. They've been plotted within the wheel. We can see that we've got quite a top-heavy team. So we've got 4 people in that teamwork and employee experience quadrant, 2 in innovation and agility. Then we've actually got 1 person sitting in results and discipline. So again, this is sort of a good case study that we can run through. So we'll be looking at this team as if they're a customer success team. So I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar, customer success team, looking at how they can maintain existing relationships with their clients, with their customers, making sure that they're able to get, the full potential out of their product or servicing. So building that rapport, continuing that long-term loyalty, and helping them if they have any issues, and continuing to strengthen that relationship. So it sort of makes sense why we have some people sitting in the top half of the wheel. If we were to find out their team type, they would actually come back as a cultivating team type. So we can see that icon there in the top left. Alrighty, so let's start looking at the objectives for this team and where they sit based on the 4 quadrants. So if we look at the first objective that they have, sits within the results and discipline quadrant, so plan projects that can be measured, tracked, and shared. And now what you will see is there's actually a purple bar that's sort of gone around the specific quadrant. Whenever you do this actually on PI, the exact same thing will pop up. It will start to bring up purple bars to show you where the objectives sit to do with the quadrants. And I feel like as a visual, that's really great because you start to see where are they stacking up. Second objective, it's falling within the process and precision quadrant. So here we've got check systems or processes for potential issues or errors. The third objective, execute plans and monitor for outcomes for efficiency. The fourth objective we've got is provide service and support to people outside of the team. And then finally, the fifth objective, provide help that allows others to resolve issues or complete work. So like I mentioned, we want to select 5 key objectives like this team's done. And once we've selected them, we'll be able to see those purple bars. So we'll start to see, okay, where do these objectives sit? Obviously, we've got 2 objectives that sit in that teamwork and employee experience quadrant, so similar to where a lot of the team is situated. But then we've also got 3 objectives that sit in the bottom half of the wheel. So a little bit different. It might be some areas where the team might need to flex. Once you've selected those objectives, like I just mentioned before, you will get the strategy type for the team. So this team is pursuing what's called an anchoring strategy. So sort of based off the objectives that they've selected, we can see that they've definitely still got a strong focus on the employee experience. So making sure that they're providing support, solving any issues, helping each other complete the work that needs to be done. But we can also see that there must clearly be a need to improve some of their internal processes. Maybe there's some undefined structure in place currently. Could mean that each team member is doing a little bit of their own thing, and maybe they just need to align on a clear process that everyone can follow, and maybe even a clear process if they were to bring in new team members to sort of help with that onboarding process. So that's what we can start to identify just based off the objectives that have been chosen and the strategy type that's been given to this team. So first off, I thought it might be good to ask some questions and get your input. In terms of the strength areas for this team, where do their strengths lie and how will that align with some of their objectives? Again, feel free to pop any answers in the chat. Where might be this team's strengths and how could it align well to some of their objectives? But definitely we know that this team is going to be quite sociable. So they're going to be really open. They're going to be able to talk to not only each other when they need help or support, but they're going to be really great at talking with their clients and coming up with resolutions. So really client focused, making sure that their clients are always happy and always being serviced as best as possible. And they've got that collaborative nature. So that's really going to work well in terms of working with each other and with their clients. And definitely, yes, supporting their stakeholders and ensuring that the customer service that they're offering is of A grade quality always, 100%. What about some gap areas? So what can we see here with the team? What might be a gap area for them, especially as we're linking it up to the objectives? Where's a little bit of a gap area or where the team might need to flex? Yep, lack of process, 100%. We've got no one in the process and precision quadrant. So going to struggle a little bit here in terms of, again, naturally their behavioral tendencies aren't to maybe think of a process and to really follow structure or even to develop it. That might be something that would be a little bit back of their mind. So the fact that we don't have someone who sits within that quadrant is a little bit of a concern, especially since we're looking at some of the objectives have got to do with defining a process and making sure that they're executing on plans to ensure that there is key efficiency. We can also see here that there's only one team member who sits in the results and discipline quadrant. So we've got that one results-oriented team member. And again, they might themselves be more inclined to follow a process. Maybe they've developed it for themselves, what might work well for them, but haven't quite shared it with the team, or maybe thought that the team might not so much want to follow it. So it'd be really interesting even to communicate with that team member and find out, have they implemented a different structure, a different process that they're using actually, because it helps them in terms of their behavioral drivers, but maybe the rest of the team isn't using due to the fact that they have a bit of a more than likely a lower formality drive, given that they sit in the top half of the wheel. So some things to start to think about, some conversations that we can start to have. Now, another big question to put out and to see before we get into the takeaways, can anyone think maybe of any solutions for this team in terms of filling those gap areas? And again, you yourself might sit in that process and precision or that results and discipline quadrant. What works well for you? Maybe you've worked with people who sit in the top half of the wheel. What sort of process and structure have you helped put in place to ensure that everything's running smoothly and efficiently? I'd love to hear some thoughts before I dig into what I've got. Because again, yeah, I always conscious that a lot of us have our own experiences that we can bring to the table in terms of maybe some solution areas. So I'll give everyone a second to think. We've got, yeah, quite a team that's great in terms of working together, are going to be really vocal in sharing their ideas. But maybe when it comes to process, sometimes they struggle a little bit. How can we help them implement process, or how can we help them structure? Yep. Lee's put in here, create written processes. Yes, so clearly there does need to be something created together, 100%. They will need to stretch in terms of the team members. So those team members in the teamwork and employee experience quadrant, you might find that some may be able to stretch down. Where might be a little bit more of a difficulty is those people who sit in the innovation and agility quadrant. If we remember back to our first webinar, flexing diagonally can be quite hard. So they will need maybe a little bit extra support or guidance, or a little bit more follow-up to ensure that they're maintaining that accuracy or that detail that they need. If we start to look at some key takeaways that I've put here, and we can go through, and again, feel free to keep adding in a few other examples if you can think of any, but might be really worthwhile leveraging the results-oriented team member. Naturally, they're going to be a little bit more inclined towards process. So maybe they can lead that initiative. Like I mentioned, have that conversation with them. See maybe if they've already created and implemented something for themselves. Is it transferable for the rest of the team? Is it something that can start to be used with everyone? Given maybe just a couple tweaks. So really leveraging them as much as possible, or maybe making them a team leader for this project, maybe giving them that opportunity to drive the rest of the team in order to put in place the process that's needed. Again, because they've got that natural tendency, they'll be really good at probably keeping the team on track and making sure that they're a little bit more accountable towards it. Another key solution that I've got here is working together to define the process. So because we've got such a collaborative bunch of people in this team, they will really work well brainstorming in a group situation. So probably not so much asking them to do it individually, or maybe just telling them, hey, this is the process that you need to follow. Actually get them together to start brainstorming, thinking of a solution, what will work for them as a group, what might not work for them as a group, also being really clear on what's expected and what needs to happen, just so there's that clarity in terms of as they're coming up with a process. But I would definitely get them to work together, because you've got such a collaborative team. They'll probably appreciate that a little bit more in terms of being involved in the decision-making process, and making sure that they've got consensus from everyone, which will be really important. Another sort of solution that we've got here is establishing some methods for accountability. So how can we make sure that people are following the process that they need to? Again, giving that clarity on what's expected, what must be followed for certain projects, and where there might be a little bit of flexibility. So, right now you might have a team who's really just going in and around any type of rules or any type of process. Again, just give them that clarity on what's expected, what they have to abide by. And then again, also letting them know where there might be a little bit more room for flexibility. But these are just some of our key takeaways that we've popped here. Of course, there'll be many others, and I'm sure that you're starting to think of other solutions that might work, especially if you've been in a similar situation where you've had to develop and implement process and issue it out to a team. But what's great is that the software helps you with this. So you're not expected to think of all the solutions on your own. When you actually go through and you pop in the objectives, you get the strategy type, the system will actually give you some takeaways and some solutions. So you can most definitely leverage those, see what might work, take them, build on them. So that's what's really great, is you will get those prompts within the tool to help you and guide you. But a really interesting case study, and like I mentioned before, more often than not, your objectives are actually going to sit different to the team. So one really good key example here. Alrighty, let's look at another example. again, just to help keep applying our learning. So we can see here, we've got a really bunch of people who's in the bottom half of the wheel. We've got about almost 7 team members in the bottom half, and then we've got 1 team member in the teamwork and employee experience. And again, feel free if you want to add to the chat what this might mean as a team. We've got such a bottom heavy team. If they were to come out what team type they would get, it'd actually be an executing team type. And again, you might remember that we did touch on that last week. So really methodical, really efficient in the way that they're going to work, quite different to the previous team. This group here will actually love process and will follow process, and we'll have more of an inclination to look at what is currently developed and how they can improve on that, rather than what can be done new. As you can see, there's no one who sits in that innovation and agility quadrant. It's going to be really hard for people to flex diagonally who sit in that process and precision. So thinking of new solutions, new ideas is most definitely not front of mind. But this team has hit a little bit of a roadblock, and they're actually losing customers and clients to competitors based on the fact that they're not coming up with new solutions. So they're actually losing out a little bit of their clients based that they're going to competitors who have come up with some new innovative approaches and who have stayed on top of their game. So obviously some issues are starting to arise from that in terms of how can they retain their existing customer base, and how can they also get back a bit of that market share that they've lost. So that's sort of what we're looking at here. So let's see what objectives this team has. So first off, we've got make the organization and its offering more visible and appealing. So we're starting to get some objectives in the innovation and agility quadrant. Second one, sell the company's products or services to customers. So obviously there's a need to develop a new product or service offering and then promote that and start to sell that. And then we've got the third one also in the innovation agility quadrant in terms of demonstrating how that new product service is valuable, and again retaining and bringing back some clients that have been lost. So we can already see 3 key objectives in the innovation agility quadrant. Quite a stretch for the team. The fourth one sits within that results and discipline quadrant. So decide on tactics and take action to outperform competitors, and then also develop strategies to increase market presence. So those are where the 5 objectives sit. 3 within the innovation and agility, 2 in the results and discipline quadrants. And if we were to get their strategy type, it would come back as a pathfinding strategy, purely based on the fact that they need to be a little bit more innovative in their approach and actually start to expand their product and service offering. So a little bit different, and this is going to be quite a stretch for the team, but 100% this can occur. So again, happy for people to add in what are the strengths of this team. So let's start off with that. What strengths does this team have? If you want to add into the chat, what strengths are we starting to look at with this team? It's got a lot of people in that process and precision. What does that mean? What are they going to bring to the table? Yep, so very detail orientated. So going to really be focused on the facts and the data 100%. They're going to follow clear direction. Yes, they'll be really good at any delegation as long as they've got that clarity 100%. And I think that's starting to touch on some things that I've put here. Detail orientated, they're going to be really organized and quite efficient in the way that they work. All some good key strengths that can definitely be pulled upon even when we're looking at these objectives. Now, where is the big gap area, and why might this team not be performing as well in terms of when we're looking at their new key objectives and linking that to their strategy? What's the big gap area here when we're looking at this team formation? What's missing? Who don't we have? Yeah, we've got a huge gap in innovation and agility. Yeah, massive. And that's probably why this team maybe has fallen a little bit behind, because again, we just don't have a team member who's thinking about those new solutions, thinking about those new ideas, and maybe it's just fallen back to the end of the priority list because it's just not a natural behavioral tendency for this team.
And Alexia, we had a team like this the other day where one of their values as a company was innovation, but the team formation looked like this as a company. And it was interesting when you asked them the question around, well, what does innovation mean to you? Like, tell me how you're actually innovative. And it was interesting when we sort of went deeper and deeper on that conversation. It was like, oh, well, we innovate our process. That's really what it came down to. So for them, innovation was like, oh, yeah, we're really open to using new software. I'm like, why? And they're like, so we can be more efficient. So for them, innovation was around efficiency, not new ideas or new ventures or, going out and selling and growing the company or whatever. It was, we innovate in process improvement. So it's interesting just that what that word might even mean to a group that sits in that quadrant, and the perception on even the language when they look at the tool.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's such a good point to make, having that conversation with the team, trying to identify what does innovation mean to them, how might they need to look at it maybe from a slightly different approach at times, might be a really key conversation to have, 100%. But when we're looking again, we've got this huge gap within this quadrant and a huge gap in terms of people coming up with ideas or starting to wanting to develop a new sort of system or process or product that might work. Big issue there, and something that might need to be sort of compensated, either if we look at from other team members, who can we bring in, or looking at it from the perspective of sort of pushing the team to think a little bit more outside the box and challenging them. I'd be really interested to see if anyone has any ideas on some solutions for this group. Maybe you've been in a similar team environment. Maybe you've been the only person who sits in innovation and agility. How have you been able to get some people to think a little bit more alike when needed? Feel free to add in the chat what you think might be a bit of a solution for this group. Be interested to see some ideas. I know it's a little bit of a tricky one when we think we've got such a process-driven team. How can we get them to move and flex within that quadrant? But I might give everyone a second to maybe put some ideas if they have any. It is quite tricky. But when we looked at it, one key idea that I thought was really great, and sometimes we can forget, is why not innovate with our clients or with our customers? Actually give out a bit of a survey, get some feedback from them, have those conversations in terms of what are we doing really well? Do they have a problem area that we're actually not meeting their needs, so there's no solution to solve that problem? And maybe how can we improve on our existing solutions or our existing product service offerings? So that can really help get some key data. Because one thing this group loves is data. They want information. So if they actually obtain that from their clients, it might start to give them a little bit more of an idea of what needs to be done next. What do we actually need to work on? Because they've got some, actual backings to go off in terms of that feedback. Second I've got here is include any additional internal stakeholders, preferably who sit within that innovation and agility quadrant. So maybe you can pull on other team members from a different team, a different department, to help brainstorm some new ideas, to help bring a new perspective to the group and really give them some options in terms of how can they expand. And most definitely, Chan, what you've hit on, if you really need some people to sit in this quadrant, you may need to look at hiring, and maybe hiring an additional 1 or 2 team members who fit within that quadrant to give that perspective. But hiring can take some time. If you need someone a bit more on that immediate basis, you could look at leveraging another team member, bringing them in, and getting them to help with that collaboration. We've also got really challenging the team to think ahead. So especially as a manager, as a leader of this group, this team will really need to be driven to think a little bit more creatively, or to think outside the box in terms of what might be a new solution to an existing problem. As we know, they will feel more comfortable looking at the existing processes and structure, but maybe if you give them that data, that evidence in terms of what's been the drop-off client rate, what's been the drop-off in terms of product service usage, again, give them the facts, the evidence, so they have that behind them to be able to really start to identify, okay, we do have a problem area here and we do need to come up with a bit of a new solution in order to rectify it. And then from there, building that roadmap in terms of what needs to be done in that 3, 6, 9 months, who can they leverage, who can help implement. You know, we've got already a great team of implementers. We just need a bit of that initiation, that innovation to happen in the beginning, to then really build out that roadmap. So you can definitely still leverage on this team's strengths, but help them fill those gap areas so they can actually keep moving forward. I don't know if anyone else has any other ideas that they wanted to pop into the chat, but that's sort of some key takeaways that we can sort of look at when it comes to this group. But really what we've seen from both these case studies is that your objectives, 1 or 2 or 3, will probably sit differently to your team's formation. So I would really recommend that if you're currently, especially as we're slowly going to, you know, next year, it's already December almost. So a lot of us have probably got our 2023 plans, our strategy plans. Have a look at this in the tool. Start to map out those objectives to do with the strategy, see where the team sits, where they might need to flex, so you can already start to implement strategies and solutions from the beginning. That will be really key. Give the team the awareness in terms of what needs to be done. Definitely powerful as a manager and a leader to have this understanding, but we definitely encourage to drop it down and share it with your team members, because again, when you look at this visually, you really start to understand what's going on. You can see, wow, the objectives are on the other side of where our team sits. Everyone can understand it purely just based off a visual, even if they don't have a lot of PI knowledge. So share it with your team. You could also look at team discovery from the perspective, if you've got a current team or group that isn't performing or hasn't maybe met their objectives or hasn't been able to achieve the strategy, put them through team discovery, see what's going on. Is it because in actual fact their objectives sit really different to the team formation? Start to identify why these issues might be going on. But some two areas of where you can use it, and of course lots of other different situations, but most definitely would recommend as we're getting into the new year, start comparing it to the 2023 strategy that you might have in place and putting those measures and those solutions from the beginning to really strengthen the team to work effectively to be able to achieve it. That's really the goal from using team discovery. So that's sort of the wrap up of today. Thanks everyone for joining.